Although we fast in Asara b'Teves, but there were 3 days of suffering, the 8th of Teves, the 9th of Teves, the 10th of Teves. Sure, you announced it, yeah. So the 10th of Teves, we know what happened. The 10th of Teves was the beginning of the siege against Yerushalayim. So Nebuchadnezzar surrounded Yerushalayim on the 10th of Teves, his army, and the Churban happened 3 years later. On the 8th of Teves, after this, during the second Beis HaMikdash, that's when the Chachamim completed the Greek translation of the Torah. And that was considered to be a bad thing because it made the Torah available to Goyim, etc. So that was during the Bayis Sheni. The third Tzara is the 9th of Teves. So Chazal say the 8th of Teves was the translation of the Torah into Greek. The 10th of Teves is when Nebuchadnezzar surrounded Yerushalayim. But the 9th of Teves was a tragedy. V'loi ratzu chachamim loymar lama. The Chachamim didn't want to tell you why. They just said it's a fast day. Some people fasted on the 8th, 9th, and 10th. They didn't want to tell you why. So in the Selichais, Itaka says, it was the yahrzeit of Ezra HaSofer. Ezra HaSofer was Kimad on the Madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Gemara says. Had the Torah not been given through Moshe, it would have been given through Ezra. So Ezra's Patira was a shrekach, a tragedy, and Tzaddikim would fast on the day of Ezra's Patira. But the obvious question is, so why keep that a secret? Why would that be a reason not to be Megala? Say it's the yahrzeit of Ezra HaSofer. There are Tzaddikim who fast on Moshe Rabbeinu's yahrzeit, Zayin Adar. So the same folks who fast on Zayin Adar would also fast on the Tes Teves. So because of this, I see some people here from the center, so I apologize for repeating it. I'll try to say it just quickly. Is that, I know, I said it earlier today. So there are two different ideas that are connected to the 9th of Teves that have a shaykhus to Christianity. The first is, it was the birthday of Yashka, which, more or less corresponds, whatever it is. That the Christians say it was December 25, that may or may not be right, but whatever it was, the Hebrew tarikh of his birthday was said to be the 9th of Teves. Memela, because of all of the tsaros that Christianity has caused for Jews over thousands of years, his birth is like a tragedy for us, so we're misana. And if that's the case, the Chachamim didn't want to be Megala that we're fasting on the day that Yashka was born, because that could cause all sorts of retaliation and the like. So the Chiddush is, it turns out that Jews do commemorate, Christmas. We celebrate, not celebrate, but we do special things on the day of his birth. We fast, according to some, it's that. Now, there's a second pshat that says the other way around, that it's not commemorating the birthday of Yashka, but it's an avelis over the yahrzeit, the death of someone who was a great tzaddik, and this tzaddik's name is Shimon Kippur. Now, Shimon Kippur, the word Kippur in Aramaic means rock, Eben. So Shimon Kippur would be known as Simon Peter, and those of you that know your Christian history know that Yashka's main apostle, his main Talmud Muvak, was a guy whose name was Simon. He was Jewish, just like Yashka was Jewish. He was Jewish, Shimon, and Yashka named him Peter, rock, because he said, you're my rock, you're my foundation. So he became known as Simon Peter, Shimon Kippur, and later Christianity knows him as Peter. So we are commemorating his yahrzeit as if that's something that we're sad about. So why are we sad? So the Rishonim bring a Maisa, they connect it to a medrash, but it's not really a medrash from Chazal, that Shimon Kippur, Shimon Kippur was the first pope. Shimon Kippur was the first bishop of Rome. The Catholic Church was miyusad on Shimon Kippur. He was the Mamala Makam, the main Mamala Makam. that the Medrash says he did everything l'shem shamayim, because in the early decades of Christianity, all the Christians were Jews, and they were davening in shuls, and they were doing mitzvahs, they were wearing tefillin, they were keeping kosher, and they were kind of infiltrating within the Jewish community, just like a Messianic Christian, a Jew for Jesus today, trying to bring in all sorts of things that are apikorsis, kfira. So Shimon Kippur came up with this brilliant idea. He said, I tell you what, I'll make myself the leader of a new religion called Christianity, and I will take away all of the Christians from the shuls. So there'll be a separation, to be mavdil ben kodesh, to the opposite of kedusha. And in that way, the Christians will not have a hashpah on Yidden. So he said he knows he'll never be able to be with Yidden again. He knows that he's making himself like a separate religion. But he's doing it l'shem shamayim, to keep the Tumah out of Klal Yisrael. And the Medrash records that Shimon Kippur, the rest of his life, he was in Rome, and he was the first pope, the head of the church. He kept mitzvahs b'tzina. He wore tefillin b'tzina. Barabim, he was fakir. Barabim, he had to portray himself as an enemy of the Jewish people. But his whole kavanah was l'shem shamayim. So as a zecher to the fact that he was a tzaddik gomor, his yahrzeit was observed as a tainus, but the Chachamim didn't want to be megala that was the reason. Now the Machzor Vitri is a commentary on Tfilas from Talmidim of Rashi. He brings a lot of things from Rashi. Vitry is a city in France. The Machzor Vitri is one of the Rishonim of Simcha of Vitry. So the Machzor Vitri brings a tradition that Shimon Kippur is the author of Nishmas. That the tefillah that we say on Shabbos is a very beautiful tefillah. It's a tefillah that's considered to be a segula for many things. Right? Rebbetzin Kanievsky was always pushing people to say Nishmas for 40 days or whatever. But the Machzor Vitri brings a Messiah that Shimon Kippur was the Mechaber. Now, I want to say very clearly that the Machzor Vitri then says Chas v'Shalom that was the case. I mean, the Machzor Vitri absolutely is chaylik on it and says that wasn't the case. So you'll often see people say, oh, Machzor Vitri says that Shimon Kippur wrote Nishmas. Fakir, Machzor Vitri says Shimon Kippur didn't write Nishmas. But the point is, Machzor Vitri brings Yesh Omrim that he did it. So apparently this was a tradition that many people had. I don't know what the Metzias is or the like. So this is, again, the mystery of the 9th of Teves. Yesh Omrim, it's the yahrzeit of Ezra HaSefer. But in which case, why would it be a mystery, Bichlal? Yesh Omrim, it's the birthday of Yashka. And Yesh Omrim, it's the yahrzeit of Shimon Kippur, who we consider to have died as a tzaddik gomor, to be matzil Klal Yisrael. So it's quite an amazing thing. But as I say, there are Rishonim who bring this story b'shem the Medrash, but it's not a Medrash of Chazal. You have to understand that there are many Sfarim or stories that were written in the time of the Gaonim and even after the time of the Gaonim that were called Medrash, but they're not the Midrashim of Chazal. In fact, a lot of the Midrashim of Chanukah, are not Midrashei Chazal. There's these later Midrashim, and that's why there's always going to be a shaila how reliable those later Midrashim are. So what people do is they see if the Rishonim bring them, meaning if Rashi brings, so we can assume it's reliable. But there's a lot of stuff in those later Midrashim that the Rishonim don't bring, and therefore if that's the case, everything is mesupik, how reliable those Midrashim are. Yeah.
This is all reference to the 9th of Teves, right?
This is the 9th of Teves. Yeah, the 9th. So the 8th for sure is the day that they finished the Targum of the Torah in Greek. The 9th is these different opinions. The 10th is the 10th. Now, I had mentioned also, again, forgive you guys for hearing it again, the Chiddush of the Avudraham. This is unusual, obviously. To fast on Erev Shabbos is very unusual. But the Avudraham that the Beis Yosef brings as a Chiddush, that if it would be possible for Asara B'Teves to fall out on Shabbos, we would even fast on Shabbos. It even would be Deicha Shabbos. Now, that's an untestable hypothesis, because under the Jewish calendar, Asar B'Teves can never be on Shabbos because of the Rosh Hashanah days, meaning since the first day of Rosh Hashanah cannot be on Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, that's automatically going to affect every other holiday. And based on the cheshbonos of how many days each month is, it's impossible for Asar B'Teves to be on Shabbos because of the Rosh Hashanah rules of Lo Adu. Adu is Aleph, Daled, Vav, Sunday, Wednesday, Friday. So it's untestable, but the Avrudram asserts, theoretically, Asar B'Teves would even be Deicha Shabbos. So the question is a very obvious question. L'chaira, Tisha B'Av is much more chomer than Asar B'Teves. Asar B'Teves was the beginning of the siege against Yerushalayim. Okay, the beginning of the siege. Tisha B'Av is the Chorban itself. Now, if Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, we don't fast on Shabbos. So why should Asar B'Teves be more chomer than Tisha B'Av that you would even fast on Shabbos, right? What's going on? So the Chassam Sofer says, a very interesting ha'ara. He says like this, he says, we know that there is one fast that you can do on Shabbos besides Yom Kippur, and that's a tainis chalaim. If you have a bad dream, you're scared, right? So you have a tainis chalaim. So why is a tainis chalaim mutter on Shabbos? Because the prohibition of fasting on Shabbos is when you're fasting over a past tzara. I'm fasting over the Chorban, I'm fasting over tzaras. So that I don't do on Shabbos. But when I fast because I'm afraid of a future thing that will happen to me, so that I'm allowed to do. So what's the problem? With Tainis Chalaim, I'm not fasting because I had a bad dream. I'm fasting because I have a pachad that the dream is a nevuah from Hashem that something bad will happen. So a fast to forestall a poranias, the Chassam Sofer says is mutter b'Shabbos. That's the raya from Tainis Chalaim. So, says the Chassam Sofer, we think Asar B'Teves is only a fast about the past, that Nebuchadnezzar, had a siege against Yerushalayim. If that would be the case, you wouldn't fast on Shabbos. But says the Chassam Sofer, Asar B'Teves is the Yom Hadin, if the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt this year or not rebuilt this year. Just like on Rosh Hashanah, Hashem decides who will live and who will die. And Yom Kippur, that's sealed. Asara B'Teves, tomorrow, the Eibishter decides, are we going to be Zaycha to a binyan Beis HaMikdash? Or are we not going to be Zaycha to a binyan Beis HaMikdash? It is the Yom Hadin for binyan Beis HaMikdash. Therefore, the Chassam Sofer says, it's like a tainis chalaim. We're not just fasting because of the tragedies of the past. We're fasting so we shouldn't have a tzara come on us that we're not going to be zeichel binyan Beis HaMikdash. Now, people might ask a kasha, well, if tomorrow it will be upgepaskend, if there'll be a mikdash or not, so after tomorrow, why should I daven for the binyan Beis HaMikdash? And as we manashach, if it was nigzar that it will be built this year, it'll be built this year. If it was nigzar that it's not going to be built this year, then it's not going to be built this year. So what am I davening for? But the answer is, you can ask the same kasha about Yom Kippur. Why do I daven after Yom Kippur? I mean, am I davening already for Tufshem? Well, maybe I'm davening for next year already. The whole year is for next year. But l'char l'gabe this year, Tufshin Pei Dalet. All right, whatever terminus you want to use. You want to use Hoshana Rabbah, use Hoshana Rabbah. But there is some point at which, it's up kapasket. Let it be Yom Kippur, let it be Hoshana Rabbah, let it even be Chanukah. But whatever it is, as far as I know, Chanukah is like the latest of the latest Gemar Din, with all of the different things. So why am I davening for life? The answer is Pashut. The answer is that even after there's a Gezar Din Mamish, even after the Eibishter signed, sealed, delivered, Tshuva can rip up everything. But it's harder. It takes more spiritual energy, meaning to say it's much easier to get a favorable gezerah than it is to rip up and destroy an unfavorable gezerah. So therefore, it behooves us to be mispalel before the Gezar Din, rather than be mispalel after the Gezar Din. Ein achinami, tefillah after the Gezar Din still helps, but it requires more of a koach. Okay, and this is the halach of the Gemara. This is b'shem Rav Yitzchak. Yafet, Saika, B'chalei. Saika is tefillah to Hashem. It works all. It helps all the time. Bein kaidem Gezar Din, bein liachar Gezar Din. But there's an afkamina. It's harder to be kaireya Gezar Din than not to get a bad. It's easier to pray to Hashem that I shouldn't have a bad Gezar Din than to pray that if I have a bad Gezar Din, it should be ripped up. And that's why we do such avodah in Elul, Rosh Hashanah, and now, as the Chazam Sefer is saying, Binyan Beis HaMikdash should be that way as well. Now, another final point about Asar B'Teves is that Asar B'Teves, l'chayra, has no shaychus to the Bayis Sheni. It's only shaykh to the Bayis Rishon, meaning unlike Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the Chorban Bayis Rishon, and it's also the Chorban Bayis Sheni. 490 years later, to the day, right? The amount of time, the number of years between the Chorban Bayis Rishon and the Chorban Bayis Sheni is 490 years. How do I know that? Because it was 70 years from the Chorban Bayis Rishon to the Binyan Bayis Sheni, and the Bayis Sheni stood 420 years. Therefore, 70 plus 420 is 490. To the day, Tisha B'Av, Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av has a shaychus both to the Bayis Sheni and to the Bayis Rishon and the Bayis Sheni. But Asar B'Teves has no Roman parallel, meaning the only thing that l'chara happened in Asar B'Teves is Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, began his siege around the city. But there's no Roman parallel. In fact, it's an interesting question. Why don't we fast on the day that the Romans began their siege around Yerushalayim? What day was that? I don't know. I actually don't know. I don't even know if historians know a particular day that the Romans began their siege around Yerushalayim. So Asar B'Teves is only connected l'chayra to the Bayis Rishon and not to the Bayis Sheni. Now, why is that significant? Because l'chayra, on any day that you think about the Chorban Beis HaMikdash, your avodah is to think about the averos that were geirim the Chorban and try to be misakin. Now, everyone knows the famous Gemara in Yuma, very, very famous Maimer Chazal, that the first Mikdash was nechrav because of avodah zara, gili arayas, shvichus damim. The worst averos, the big three that you got to give your life. The second Mikdash, the Yidden were largely religious. They were keeping mitzvahs. So why was it nechrav? So the Gemara says, sinas chinam. There was a lot of sinas chinam. And the Gemara says, bo urei. For avodah zara, gilei arayah shvichas damim, the Chorban was only 70 years. For sinas chinam, we're going through the Chorban even now. The Gemara already remarked how many years it was, and just add 1,200 years to that, and you get all of this thing. So that's how Chomer Sinas Chinam is. So l'chayra like this. So l'chayra, on Tisha B'Av, where I think about both the Mikdash Rishon and the Mikdash Sheni, so I can think about Sinas Chinam. But l'chayra, if Asar B'Teves, that's the question, I'm thinking out loud. If Asar B'Teves only has a shaychus to the Mikdash Rishon, and Asar B'Teves does not have a shaychus to the Mikdash Sheni, then the averos that we should be thinking about in Asar B'Teves is avodah zara, gilui arayos, shvichas damim. And the question is, are we that bad? Meaning, if the issue is sinas chinam, so unfortunately sinas chinam exists in a very, very strong measure, even among frum people, maybe more among frum people even. So to say we have to do a cheshbon nefesh on sinas chinam, it's very sad, but that's what we got to do. But do I have to do a cheshbon hanefesh on avodah zara, gili arayah, shvichas damim? In other words, if asara b'teves is legabe the mikdash rishon, how am I supposed to relate to the averis of avodah zara, gili arayah, shvichas damim? Right? You hear the kasha. So there are three terutzim that the Svarim give to this particular difficulty. Number one, first of all, Chazal identify a lot of Averos as if it is one of the Gimel Chamuras. So, for example, Chazal say, Kol HaKayes, anyone that has anger, is Ki'ilu Oved Avodah Zarah. So, even if I'm not guilty of bowing down to an idol, but I still have a shaychus to Avodah Zarah if I have a midah of kas. Kol HaKayes Ki'ilu Oved Avodah Zarah. And I think I mentioned before, either here or somewhere else, the Balatanya's explanation. Why is kas Ki'ilu Oved Avodah Zarah? Because why does a person get angry? A person gets angry because he thinks he's not getting what he deserves. Somebody is hurting him or somebody is not giving him what he thinks it belongs to him. So he's angry because he's being deprived of what's his entitlement. But if you believe that every single thing that happens to you is determined by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then as the Chayvus HaLevavos says, no person can really hurt another person. Yeah, the guy who hits me is a bad guy because he's making a choice that he shouldn't make. But if it wouldn't be Hashem's will for me to get hit, I wouldn't get hit. Or I wouldn't hurt, or he'd miss me, or whatever it would be. So if you're angry at him, right, I'm angry at him, that means I'm not maimin that Hashem controls the world. And that's already Avodah Zarah. I believe in any other kayach besides Hashem who controls the world. That's Avodah Zarah. It's lav dafka bowing down to a statue. If I believe there's any other force that dictates what happens in the world, that's Avodah Zarah. So, therefore, even if I don't bow down to an idol, if I have anger, that's Avodah Zarah. And similarly, malbin pnei chaveira barabim, if you humiliate somebody publicly, that's considered to be murder. So, yeah, I didn't murder anybody. I didn't take a knife and stick it in their heart. But if I was malbin pnei chaveira barabim, I am shofech damim. If I am koyes, I'm oved avodah zarah. And gili arayas maybe is also not so difficult because Chazal say, hirhure avera, sexual fantasies, obsessions, thoughts, that could be as bad or even worse than the maisa avera itself. And unfortunately, we live in a culture where, the whole culture is saturated and super saturated with all sorts of things that could cause hirhure avera. So, we live unfortunately in a world of gilui arayas. So that's one teretz, meaning even if I'm not personally guilty of avodah zarah, nevertheless I might have gotten angry. I shouldn't say might have. I'm almost certainly, we're nichshal in anger. I speak for myself. Okay. And even if I didn't murder anybody, but I am malbin, if I was malbin pnei chaveiro barabim, often by being angry, gufa, I'm also, right? So when I'm angry, I'm doing a double thing. I'm an Oved Avodah Zarah and a Reitzeach if I humiliate somebody, right? So it's Ritzich and Avodah Zarah. And Gili Arayas is if I'm open to all the different things in the street, there's a bechina of Hirhure Avera, even if I did not act upon it in that way. So that's teretz number one. Teretz number two is based on a maisa that the Beis Yosef brings. People don't always know this. Rav Yosef Karo was the Rav of Tzfas in the time of the Ari. I mean, the Ari was younger. The Ari was there, Moshe Cordovero, Rav Shlomo Alkabetz, tremendous. Rav Alshech, Moshe Alshech, tremendous Gedalim in Tzfas. Much more than Yerushalayim at that time, in the 1500s. Tzfas was the center of Torah, certainly of Nister, but even of Nigla in Eretz Yisrael. And Rav Yosef Karo was the Rav. But people don't realize Rav Yosef Karo himself was a great Makubal. Like, in a way, he gets overshadowed because he was the Paisik of the door, but he was actually a great Makubal in and of itself. When the Arizal came to Tzfas, Rabbi Yitzchak was already in his 70s. The Arizal came to Tzfas like 37. He died less than 2 years later. So the Arizal was giving shiurim in Kabbalah, and Rabbi Yosef Karo used to come to hear the Arizal teach Kabbalah, but apparently it's brought down he always fell asleep in the middle, and the Arizal told him it was nigzer in Shemayim that it's not lefi chavotcha that you should hear Torah from me. The Eibishter doesn't do it. The Eibishter wants me to realize how great you are, and therefore he didn't want you to be my Talmud in any type of bechina this way. But Rav Yosef Karo was no slouch in Kabbalah, and in fact, Rav Yosef Karo had a chavrusa with a malach. He had a malach that was called his magid, his preacher, and he wrote a diary, not intended to be published. He wrote a diary of his Shakla V'Tarya with his malach. You can get the sefer. The sefer is called Magid Meisharim. I believe there's even an English translation. Perhaps it's about discussions with my angel. So in the sefer Magid Meisharim, he tells a maisa like this. Now again, I haven't seen this in many years, so I'm not sure I'm getting all the details, but the general maisa is accurate. He says he had been harvening, he had been miyageya on a sugya. I think it was in Kesubas for a very long time. He was mamish, thinking, he had all sorts of kashas. And finally, after 2 weeks of Yegiya Atzuma, Baruch Hashem, he had a pshat, he had a hezber, and he was very, very happy that Baruch Hashem, he was able to understand this difficult chelek of Torah. So he's walking by in Tzfat, and you can, if you've ever been to Tzfat, the narrow streets, still there, same streets, and he overhears a shoemaker learning with a 7-year-old son. And they're going over the same Gemara, and the 7-year-old asks his father, the shoemaker, the very kasha that the Beis Yosef couldn't understand. Now, I assume the Beis Yosef didn't want to eavesdrop, but he just, this he had to hear, like what's going on. And the father was annoyed. The father said to the son, he says, to the 7-year-old son, he says, I knew this was too hard for you. You're asking me such simple questions. I mean, obviously the pshat is, and he said exactly what it took the Beis Yosef. 2 weeks to figure out. The shoemaker says to his son, he says, you should have figured this out yourself. It's so simple. What's going on? You're not ready for this. So Rav Yosef Karo was heartbroken because he felt, if indeed this is so pashut, that there's a taina on the kid for not knowing it, then why was Hashem Maineya such an obvious thing from him? Because there must be an einish. Hashem is, not letting him see pashut things. So he had someone to ask. He asked his malach. He said, what is my pesha? What is my avera? What do I have to do tshuva for? That Hashem was Maineya from me. Devorim peshutim, that even a child is expected to know. So the malach told him, now this was not written for publication, this was a private thing he wrote. Later they published the manuscript. In fact, you can ask Yosef if he wanted it to be private, do you ever just to publish, but whatever, but it says there in the Sefer like this, he says that fakert, the pshat that you had in this Gemara was very, very deep. The world was not deserving of it. The world was not roy for it. But through your Yegiya Atzuma, you brought it down into the world. Once you brought it down into the world, then anybody could get it from then on. Anybody can get it. Now, I'll try to explain what that means, but this explains the phenomenon that often happens to guys in shir, where you're mechavein, right? You ever have that pleasure of being mechavein for a kasha is asked, and you come up with a teretz, and they say, oh, wow, that's what the Ketzai says, that's what the Nesiba says, that's what Rebbe Akiva Eiger says, right? That's called being mechavein, right? That's kind of, you feel very good that day. I was mechavein, sometimes even to be mechavein to the kasha, mechavein to Rebbe Akiva Eiger's kasha, that's great. Mechavein to Rebbe Akiva Eiger's teretz, right? That's great. Now, answering Rebbe Akiva Eiger's kasha is always a little ambiguous. I'll tell you why. Because, it's interesting. Because sometimes the Rebbe will tell you that you got to be wrong. So I don't know why you're wrong, but of course you're wrong. If Rebbe Akiva Eiger didn't give your teretz, then of course your teretz. It's like we know ahead of time your teretz is wrong, even though I can't point out any reason why it's wrong. So answering Rebbe Akiva Eiger's kasha does not get you the same credit as being mechaven. If you're mechaven Rebbe Akiva Eiger's kasha, you're brilliant. If you answer Rebbe Akiva Eiger's kasha, you say, you're probably wrong. But okay. But be it as, where you really get into difficulty is this, though. This is where it gets a little circular. Let's say Rebbe Akiva Eiger asks a tzorech ian on Teves, and you come up with a teretz. So the Rebbe says to you, you got to be wrong, because Rebbe Akiva Eiger didn't say that. I said, but Rebbe Akiva Eiger had a tzorech ian on Teves. Now I'm making Teves right? So in a sense, your teretz and Rebbe Akiva Eiger's kasha is now making Teves. So then you have a shayla a little bit. I said, am I mechuyev to defend Rebbe Akiva Eiger, or am I mechuyev to defend Teves? Like which is the better thing to do? But okay. But this idea of mechaven, right? So what's the pshat? Well, I understand the sugya as well as Rebbe Akiva Eiger. How can I be mechaven to Rebbe Akiva Eiger? The answer is the story. Once Torah is brought into the world by the tremendous yagia of great people, it becomes available. It's like fruit, low-hanging fruit. It becomes available for people to pick it. Lahavdil, this is even true to some degree with scientific discoveries. You often find a near simultaneity of scientific discoveries happening at the same, different people discovering at the same time, and usually it comes like the first guy brought it into the world. But what's the pshat in that? What does it mean the Beis Yosef brought it into the world? He didn't teach anybody. He didn't tell anybody. He didn't write it. It only existed in his head. What's the pshat? He brought it into the world. I mean, why would the fact that he has it in his brain somehow make it easier for other people just to figure it out? So you're dealing with a very mystical idea, and that is that when a person does, and Nefesh Chaim talks about this bi'arichas, we think superficially, when I do mitzvahs, I will get reward. When I do averis, I will get an onish. We kind of look at my mitzvahs and my averis as only affecting me. That's not emes. When you do mitzvahs, learn Torah, you bring a kedusha into the world. When you do averis, you bring a tumah into the world. Your mitzvahs are not just you. Your mitzvahs bring hashpa'os into the world. And chas v'shalom, the other way around too. I do averis. I bring destructive forces into the world. So memela, the pshat is like this. When I learn Torah, when you learn Torah, and certainly when the great Gedolim learn Torah, they bring a certain kedusha into the world that lifts up everybody. So everybody, people who were not on the madrega to be masik, this Torah, are now masik it because of ripple effects. This is why the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that one of the definitions of an apikairis is not just a kaifer, a person who doesn't believe the Yud Gimel Ikrei Emunah. It says an apikairis is a person whose attitude is, my ahani la rabbanan. What do the rabbis who learn Torah do for the world? They sit and they learn in their Beis HaMedrash. They're not even teaching us. We go into the army and we plant the fields and we run the businesses and we create the economy. What do? They just sit and they learn. And that's called apikorsis. Because if you're a maimon, you say, when I sit and learn, it's not just me. I'm bringing something into the world. Now again, I think I've said over and over again enough times that this is not chas v'shalom to be mezalzel in the army and to the chayolim, and I very much believe and I say that there needs to be hakaras hatov for people who are meiser nefesh. So this is not to be any type of negative disparagement of the people who are not learning, but at the same time you have to appreciate the chashivas of your avodah, your Torah, your mitzvahs, because you're bringing kedusha into the world. So it's not just, Baruch Hashem, I'm getting more brownie points in Olam Haba. That's like a selfish one. Baruch Hashem, I'm building up all of these great things for me. It's not just for me, it's for everybody. It's for the world. That's why the Chafetz Chaim famously said that the degree of hasmada in Radin determined the level of tznius in Paris. What's the pshat? It's like an atom bomb. If you have an atom bomb, so there's ground zero. Ground zero, the radiation is very, very, very intense. Like everything gets destroyed. And then you go 500 miles away from that. It's a little schwacher. And, the radiation can go very far. It can go as far as, 10,000 miles. By the time it's 10,000 miles, though, it's still there, but it's much, much weaker. So learning is the same way. There's ground zero. Ground zero is a yeshiva beis medrash. Very intense. So Radin. So the Chavetz Chaim said, so in Radin, the Kayach HaTorah will elevate everybody. By the time it gets to Paris, maybe they're not going to be learning, but at least the women's dresses will be an eighth of an inch longer than it would otherwise be. And that's the hashpah, meaning even if it's bad out there. But the pshat is, through the Torah in Radin, it's not as bad as it would have been. Right? It's an amazing thing. So it turns out, therefore, that the anti-Semitic accusation that Jews are responsible for everything that happens in the world is actually true. We are responsible. I mean, don't tell people. Meaning, because if we did more mitzvahs, if we did more Torah, the world would be in a higher place. And if the world is in a bad place, it's because we didn't do enough. We didn't do enough, right? So the anti-Semites are mechaven to a certain emes here, that Jews are responsible. Yeah.
Does nothing the Goyim do affect the world?
It seems not. It actually seems not. The Goyim do not affect the world. Rather, let me qualify that. Certainly, Goyim do plenty of things that affect the world, but Hashem lets them do those things only because of the Jewish people. Meaning to say, without the Jewish people's mitzvahs, averos, zechuyos, or chovos, the Goyim wouldn't have power to wreak the havoc that they do. So Goyim do wreak havoc in the world. I mean, the Holocaust was done by Goyim, but it's only mitzad Yisrael that they were given such a koyach. That's what it says in Hazinu. Yatsev gevul ha'ishamim lemispar b'nei Yisrael. Hashem sets up the boundaries and the powers of nations according to the Jewish people. The Jewish people determine what the nations of the world are able to do in a good way or in a bad way. So Mamela, going back to the question I raised, and remember, as is a long arichas, as if Asara B'Teves is only connected to the Mikdash Rishon, and it's not connected to the Mikdash Sheni, then how am I supposed to think about Avodah Zarah, Gilurai Shvichas Damim, if I'm not guilty of those Averas? So the second answer is this. Even if I'm not guilty of Avodah Zarah, Gilurai Shvichas Damim, I certainly live in a world that is filled with Gilui Arayas, it's filled with Shvichas Damim, and even Avodah Zarah, money can become Avodah Zarah, whatever it would be. And so even if it's not me, I'm an achra'i for what's going out there, because my Kedusha could have changed it. My Kedusha, our learning, our mitzvahs could have changed it. And that's why Kadosh Baruch Hu holds us accountable. If the world is rotten in a lot of ways, we have an achrayus. We have a certain achrayus because we could have changed it. Not necessarily by, actively being involved in politics. The other way around. We could have changed it by our avodas Hashem. Right? So that's a second mahalach, that we have this power of affecting the world. Now, there's a third teretz that Rav Tzadok gives. Rav Tzadok says like this, Pirkei Avos says, there are shleisha devarim ha'elam maimed. There are three pillars that the world stands upon. Everyone knows this. Torah, Aveda, Gemilas Chasadim. And kishem, that the Mishnah stands on three pillars, there are three negative kaichais that are machriv the world. This is a later Mishnah. And that's kina, jealousy, taiva, lust for the material and sensual, and kavod, a desire for honor, glory, ego gratification, and the like. Kina, taiva, v'kavod, maitzian es ha'adam min ha'ilam, they take a person out of the world. The Alter Slobodka used to say that doesn't only mean you'll lose your Eilam Haba, that's for sure, but it means even your olam hazeh is lousy. Because, you live in kina, taiva. When you have kina, you'll never enjoy what you have. You'll always look at somebody else. And taiva, you'll always want more. Kavod is even worse. Kavod, you want more and more and more and more. So motzinas adam in ha'olam means not only do you have a lousy olam haba, you have a lousy olam hazeh when you live with kina, taiva, v'kavod. Although it's interesting that there was a Talmud of Slobodka who went off the derech. So he went to the altar of Slobodka, and he said to him, I think anyone that's ever been in yeshiva can identify with this. He says, listen, I know I'm not going to have Olam Haba, but why did you have to take away my Olam Hazeh? Now I can't enjoy Olam Hazeh. Meaning, that's the one thing. You can call it a curse or you can call it a bracha. He says, a Ben Torah who chas v'shalom goes off the derech will never really enjoy life. Meaning, because he knows he's not doing the right thing. Whatever, the Yitzchak, whatever it is, he doesn't go back to the right derech. Okay, that's the chaval. But he can't really enjoy the other thing either. That's why Bialik was a very, very famous Israeli. Well, he was a European, but he came to Eretz Israel, and Bialik was like the poet of Israel. I mean, he was the national poet of the Jewish state and the pre-Israel state. National poet of Zionism and the like. But Bialik, he was not Shomer Mitzvahs, although maybe at the very end of his life, maybe he started doing a little tshuva, but for a lot of his years, he was not Shomer Mitzvahs. But in his youth, he was a Talmud of the Nitziv in Volozhin. He was a Talmud in Volozhin. He learned in Volozhin. In fact, he was the head of a secret Zionist society in Volozhin in the 1870s. And the Nitziv was actually tolerant of Zionism a little bit, but Rav Chaim Soloveitchik was not. Rav Chaim Soloveitchik demanded, he wanted to know every member of this secret society was going to kick him out. Baruch Hashem, they didn't crack, because some of the people who were members, Rav Moshe Mordechai became Rosh Yeshiva of Slobodka later. I mean, who knows what would have happened if he would have been kicked out of yeshiva. But Rav Chaim wanted to kick everybody out. The Nitziv looked at some of the signs, and he knew that Bialik wrote some of the signs, and he said to Bialik, this is totally wrong, but you write such beautiful Hebrew. I can't say. the Nitziv had Rachmanis because it was such a beautiful language, or whatever it was. But Bialik wrote a very, very famous poem. Actually, I'm not a Bucky. I've never read Bialik. I do remember this when my own Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Ruderman, when we were moving from the old yeshiva, in Garrison Boulevard, we were moving to a whole new place. So we were moving to Rosh Yeshiva's library. He had a huge, huge library. And, I was in ninth grade, and I was like helping like older people doing this, but it was exciting to kind of move the Rosh Yeshiva's library. So we had to move a bookcase away from a wall. After the books were empty, just move the bookcase. And behind the bookcase, there was a waterlogged book or sefer that it looked like it had been there for 20 years. And there happened to be Bialik's poems. I think my Rosh Yeshiva was a chaver of Bialik, going all the way back. And we picked it up. I don't know if we knew what it was. Just gave it to Rosh Yeshiva, and he just asked us, "Just leave it on the ground." He threw it back on the ground. But the thing was, though, I'm bringing this up because Bialik wrote in one of his poems, he wrote a poem about the masmid. He was describing a yeshiva bacher who didn't have bread, didn't have a place to sleep, had to sleep in the Beis HaMedrash, would learn by a candle when everything was dark around him. And some people say that Bialik was making fun of the yeshiva boys who had no parnassas and everything. But the truth is, if you read the poem, you actually see that there's some Leitzonis there, but really it's a feeling in his heart that he missed those days. He had a certain kesher to those days that he was never able to leave his whole life. And Mimela, that's what the person told the Alter of Slobodka. You took away my ability to enjoy the Teves of Olam Hazeh. He says, so isn't it enough that I've lost my Olam Haba? You have to take away my Olam Hazeh too. Okay. But be it as how to get onto this, I don't know. Okay. So it's not Rav Tzadok. So here's what Rav Tzadok says. When it says in Pirkei Avos, Hakina hatayva v'hakavet, Meitzian es ha'adam min ha'elam, so Rav Tzadok says, Avodah Zara gili araya shvichas damim are extreme symptoms of underlying character flaws. I'll show you how. So even if you don't have the symptom, even if you're asymptomatic, you still have the sickness which the symptom represents. So, let's take each one. Let's take, there's Avodah Zara, Gili Araya, Shvichas Damim. So, let me start with Shvichas Damim in reverse order. Shvichas Damim is murder. So most of us don't murder, okay? Ein Echanami. But murder is an extreme manifestation of jealousy. Indeed, this is actually the case. If you factor in why murders take place outside of war and terrorism, b'derech klal, it's because of some type of kinna. Ad kedei kach, a person is jealous you took my wife, you took my girlfriend, you took my shoes, my special sneakers, whatever it is. It sounds crazy, but people murder over kinna. So, kinna is the shirish of shvichas damim. Obviously, taiva is the shirish of gilui arayos. So yeah, maybe I didn't kill anybody, but if I have kinna, I have the root of shvichas damim. Maybe I wasn't mezaneh with anybody, but if I have taiva, that's the root of gilui arayos. Avodah Zarah is a little more complicated, but Rav Tzadok compares Avodah Zarah with kavod, because Avodah Zarah, as I said before, means anything that is more important to you than Avodas Hashem becomes Avodah Zarah. So if I am concerned with my kavod, my glory, in a sense, I've made myself God. So the shirish of Avodah Zarah is kavod. So Rav Tzadok's point is, even if you don't have the extreme manifestation of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Araya, Shvichas Damim, you still have kina, which is the shirish of Shvichas Damim. You have taiva, which is the shirish of Gilui Arayos, and you have kavod, right? That I'm the most important thing, which is the shirish of Avodah Zarah, where you reject HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore we have Bekitzer 3 terutzim. I just to chazer over quickly what I was saying. We started off with the kasha, and that is Asara b'Teves only has a shaychus to the Mikdash Rishon and not to the Mikdash Sheni. The Mikdash Rishon was HaRav because of Avodah Zarah, Gila Reish Shvichas Damim, and Sinas Chinam is connected to the Mikdash Sheni. Bazai, when I'm misbainein over the Sivas HaChorban of Asara b'Teves, the only thing I'm thinking about is Avodah Zarah, Gila Shvichas Damim. What's my shaychus to that? So 3 terutzim. Teretz number 1 is Chazal say that there are averos that are equivalent. So anger is shakol keneged Avodah Zarah, and halbanas pnei chavera is shakol keneged shvichas damim, and hirhure avera are keneged gilui arayos. So in that sense, I have those averos. Teretz number 2, based on the story of the Beis Yosef, is even if I'm not guilty of those averos, but if those averos exist in the world, I have an achrayas because I could have made it better. And teretz number 3 is Rav Tzadok's teretz, and that is Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, Shvichas Damim are symptoms of shirashim that are much deeper, and that is kina, taiva, kavod. And if I have the kina, taiva, kavod, then in potential I have Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, Shvichas Damim. And that is why on Asara b'Teves I can still think about Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, Shvichas Damim. But the emes is that even though Asara b'Teves is not directly connected to the Bayis Sheni, there is a sinas chinam aspect to it as well. If you look, you'll see that the Tanesim are also connected to deeper Averis. So, for example, Shivas Arbatamas, which is the day that the Romans broke through the walls of Yerushalayim, is also the day of the Chedo Egel, the breaking of the Luchais, and the Chedo Egel. Tisha B'Av, which is the day of the Chorban Bayis Rishon and Sheni, is the day of the Chet HaMeraglim. The Meraglim came back, and they gave their report on the 8th of Av, and the night of the 9th of Av. Everybody cried, and Hashem said, you're crying a Bechia Shel Chinam for no reason. This will become a day of Bechi. So it turns out, therefore, that you see that the Chorban Beis HaMikdash is always rooted in earlier Averis of Klal Yisrael. It's rooted in the Chet HaEgel. It's rooted in the Chet HaMeraglim. So Rav Shlomo Fisher, Zechrono Livracha, who was a very big guy, and he wasn't so well known outside of people who knew, but he was a guy Notzim, very, very interesting person. He was a guy Notzim who was a Baki B'chala Terakula, but he also knew a lot of philosophy, meaning he was a Baki in like Moreh Nevuchim and like all of the Sfarim of the Rishonim on philosophy, and most Rosh Hashivas are not, especially Bakiyim in those Svarim. He was a Baki in Nister. He also knew a lot of science generally. Very unusual guy in that way. But he brings Makairis that Mechiras Yosef was an Asara B'Teves. It's not clear. I'm trying to figure out exactly what his Makor is, but he just says Huvu b'Makairis. Doesn't say where. I don't know where. I'm not aware of a medrash, but again, he knew a lot more midrashim than I know, so I believe what he says. And that's interesting, because the aside of Mechiras Yosef is vaday connected to Sinas Chinam. So it's interesting that Hagam, that Asara B'Teves, is more connected to the Bayis Rishon than the Bayis Sheni, but once again, the Zman of Peranius is connected to a primeval Chet. So Shivas Arbatamas is the Chet HaEgel. Tisha B'Av is the Chet HaMeraglim. Asara B'Teves is the Chet of Mechiras Yosef. That leaves Som Gedalia, because Som Gedalia is the fourth Tainus connected to the Chorban, which is after the Chorban by his Rishon. Nebuchadnezzar appointed a governor from a tzaddik, a governor over the Yidden that remained in Eretz Yisrael, not that many, but a small group of Jews. And Gedalia ben Achikam was assassinated just 2 months later. Right, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed Tisha B'Av. He was killed, according to most Rishonim, he was killed on Rosh Hashanah. But since you don't fast on a Yom Tov, so they made the fast the first available day, which is Gimel Tishrei. So the question is, what earlier Avera happened on Gimel Tishrei? That I don't know. I don't know if an Avera was identified. So we'll have to be ma'ayin in terms of that. But be it as it may, we should, just as we wish ourselves before Rosh Hashanah, wish everybody a Kasiva v'Chasima Taiva, like the Chasam Sofer, we should wish ourselves a Kasiva v'Chasima Taiva tomorrow, that we should be Zeicha to a Yom Hadin L'Tov, for the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. That should be B'mheira v'yameinu. So, yeah, I did mention it, but but let's see. This is, as I said, the shir is dedicated to Zecher Nishmas, Eli Nishmas, Aaron Sholem ben Meir, and the Neshama should have an aliyah. We can make a bracha to be Ma'ila the Neshama. So, pass me.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.